All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Tes Zayin and Yud Zayin Amid Aleph, and we're starting about halfway down on Tes Zayin Amid Aleph. We've been discussing cases of two halves. If you'll recall, we discussed what if part of your hand was washed in one way and then part of your hand was washed in another way. V'chule. We're going to learn a couple more cases like that, and then we'll get back to Hilchos Gittin. The Gemara says on the first word on the line, about halfway down on Tes Zayin Amid Aleph, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hare Amru, the rabbis have taught us as follows: Haba Rosh Aruba b'Mayim She'uvim. If a person is attempting to go to the mikvah, but he does so in Mayim She'uvim, in standing water, that's not a kosher mikvah. Kosher mikvah has to have rainwater that flows into it. So if he does that, or v'tahor, a person who is tahor shenaflu al rosha ve'al rubo shlosha lugan Mayim She'uvim, or someone who had 3 lugan of water poured over him, even though be'etzem he's tahor, because he tried to do this mock mikvah and it didn't work out, midirabanan he's tameh. Ayin Sham and Rashi, who discusses that this was something that we learned in Maseches Shabbos when the Yurches things that were learned in the attic. This is one of them. So the question was posed as follows. The Gemara says, Boy Rav Yirmiyah, chetzio bebia v'chetzio benefila mai. What happens if half of the water comes from Mayim She'uvim and half of the water comes from the Shlosha Lugan that's poured over him? Will he still be tamei midirabanan? The Gemara says, Teku, we're not sure. That's case number 1. Case number 2. Amar, what?
Teku, now would be great.
Yes, it would be. Amar Papa, Hare Amru, the rabbis have taught us yet another din. Balkari, we know in the times of Ezra, there was a takana that was in place for a short period of time, that if a person was a Balkari, they were not allowed to daven or learn. So the Gemara says during that time, if a person was a Balkari and he was a chole and he was sick, shanasnu alav tisha kabin mayim, and by him they poured 9 kabin of water over him. The din is tahor. He's able to remove his Balkari status, but again, as Rashi highlights, only when we're talking about Takanas Ezra. You are not tahor enough to go into the Beis HaMikdash. This is only to solve a Takanas Ezra problem. And on this, the Gemara says, Boy Rav Papa, hang on one second. What if it's chetzio b'tfila b'chetzio b'nesina mai? Would we say that if he's half in the mikvah and then they poured half of the Tisha Kabin on him, would that also remove his status of being a Balkari? Teku, we don't know the answer to that question either. And let's get back to the reservation. We've been discussing the first Mishnah in Perek HaMevid Get, where we were discussing the various possibilities and permutations of what happens when a shliach says either I saw the ksiva, but I didn't see the chasima, and a whole bunch of other iterations. So let's dig in. The Gemara says 4 lines from the bottom. Echad omer b'fanai nechtav, ve'echad omer b'fanai nechtam. Let's see that there's 2 shlichim. One of them says, I saw the ksiva, and the other one says, I saw the chasima. We had said in our Mishnah that that's puzzle, that doesn't count. Amar of Shmuel bar Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now, just in fairness, just to let you know in advance, we're going to be seeing 2 versions of this. This is version number 1. So the Gemara says about Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Shanu, when did we learn this din? That if one person says B'fanai Nechtab and the other person says B'fanai Nechtab, when is it that does not work? Lo Shanu Ella She'ein Haget Yotze Mitacha Asidei Shneim. When both of them weren't appointed to be shlichim. Really, only one of them. Reuven was appointed to be a shlich. Shimon said, I'll come for the walk. So if that happens, and one guy gives edus on the ksiva and one guy gives edus on the chasima, okay, then that doesn't work. What's the inference? Last line. Aval. Get yotze mitachas yidei shneim. If both of them were appointed to be the shlichim, and then one of them gave testimony that I saw the ksiva, the other one gave testimony that he saw the chasima, then that's kosher. Oh, so says the Gemara, Alma, top of Tezayin and Beis, Kasavar, it must be that he's of the opinion that Shnaim Sheheviu get mi Medina Sayam. If 2 people are the shlichim bringing a get from France to Yerushalayim, Ein Srichen Shiyomru B'fanenu Nechtav U'B'fanenu Nechtam. They don't have to say both. How do we see that from here? Because in our case, each one said one. So that's a raya from the Gemara that it must be that we hold that when 2 people are appointed shlichim, they don't both have to say nechtav and nechtam. One can say each. Each one can say each. So Amar le Abaye, and according to the girsa here on the side, it might be Ravasi. Amar le Abaye. This is an interesting difference in time because Abaye was in the 4th century. Ravami and Ravasi were very early on the Rime. That was probably a difference of probably 75 years, approximately 75 years between them. So historically speaking, that doesn't sound like a huge amount of time. But for the authorship of the Gemara, that's pretty significant. So we don't know exactly when this was written. Elameata, if what you're saying is true, then we have a problem. Because Seifa, the Katani, in our Mishnah at the open of the Perek, we were taught something that doesn't stem with what we just said. What were we taught? 4 lines down. Shnayim omrim b'fanenu nechtav. If 2 people say, I saw that it was written, ve'echad omer b'fanai nechtam, and one person said, a third person said, I saw that it was signed. So the Tanakama holds puzzle, and the Mishnah had continued at the beginning of this Perek on, what was it, Tesvav Amud Aleph? Yeah, on Tesvav Amud Aleph, that Rabbi Yehuda says it was he was machshir, that Rabbi Yehuda was machshir in such a case where 2 people said that they saw the ksiva and one person said that they saw the chasima. So what's the reason for the Tanakama? Why does the Tanakama hold that if 2 people saw the ksiva and one person saw the chasima that is puzzle? Taima, because the ein haget yotze mitachas yidei shneim, because these 2 guys were not both appointed to be shliach. What's the inference? Haget yotze mitachas yidei shneim machshir rabbanon. Had it been that really both of these people were shlichim, so then the inference of our Gemara is that mechashrei rabbanon, the rabbis who right now say puzzle, would have agreed. Amar le, the Gemara says you're absolutely right. That would have been the game-changing difference for the sheet of the rabbanon had it been that both shlichim were actually appointed by the husband to deliver the get. So then the Gemara gets to its question. If that's true, then if in fact we're dealing with a case where only one person was appointed as shliach, just Ruvain, and not Ruvain and Shimon, then b'mai plige, then what exactly is the argument? Why would Rabbi Yehuda ever say machshir? Because it seems to be that we all hold that that only one aide was appointed, only one shliach was appointed, and that's a kasha against the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, and really we don't understand our Mishnah now. So the Gemara responds about 10 lines down and says, I'll explain the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Mar Savar, according to one opinion, this is the opinion of the Tanakama who said puzzle. Gazrinan, we have the following gzeira, that Dilma, Asya le'ichlufe b'kiyum shtaras ta'alma be'ed echad. We're afraid that a person might change the rules. They might make a mistake between the rules of get, which are a little bit looser, and the regular rules of kiyum shtaros. We're afraid that they might make a mistake, and therefore the Chachamim said that in a case of 2 people who say that I saw the ksiva, and one said nechtam, so then it's going to be puzzle. Umar Savar, according to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, lo gazrina, there is no gzera. So really, we're only talking about a gzera derabbanan. All of this is version number 1. Version number 2, just to go back to where we started, if we look at the 2 dots on the bottom of where of Tes Zayin and Aleph, let's just remember which line in the Mishnah we're analyzing. The line in the Mishnah we're analyzing is Echad Omer B'fanai Nechtav, Ve'echad Omer B'fanai Nechtam Pasal. So with that in mind, let's go back to the Lishnach Rina, which is a quarter of the way down on Tes Zayin and Beis. Lishnach Rina, there's another possible way to understand that line of the Gemara, that line of the Mishnah, that if one of the Shlichim said B'fanai Nechtav, and the other one said, I saw the Chasima that it's Pasal, says the Gemara, Amrei La, some people say it says follow. Amrei La, Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Yochanan, Afilu get Yotze, Mitachas Yidei Shneim Pasal. This is a very strict shita, that even if both people were in fact appointed as Shlichim, we would still say Pasal. This is very divergent, because according to version number 1 of the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, had it been that they were both appointed, then the line of B'fanai Nechtav by person 1 and B'fanai Nechtav by person 2 would have been kosher. Here we're saying that no, even if it's true that they were both appointed as Shlichim, it doesn't matter, Pasal. Alma, what do we see from here, says the Gemara? Kasavar, it must be that they hold that Shnayim, that Rav Yochanan holds in this version, Shnayim sheheviu get mi Medinas Hayam, that if 2 people bring a get from Medinas Hayam, tzrichin sheyomru b'fanenu nechtav b'fanenu nechtam. We can't have one person speaking about the ksiva and one person speaking about the chasima. We need both people to follow the rules properly, and they both have to say b'fanenu nechtav b'fanenu nechtam. Very divergent from our previous Gemara. So big machlokas. We'll come back to this machlokas in a minute. But before we do that, just like in version 1, when we saw Rav Yochanan's Shita, we asked a question from Abaye or Ravasi. We're going to do the same thing here. Says the Gemara as follows. Amar le Abaye, if that's true, if what you're saying is true, then we have a problem. Seifa, we have the Seifa de Katani that taught us the following thing. Shnayim omrim b'fanenu nechtav ve'echad omer b'fanai nechtam pasal. Our Mishnah had said that if there are two people who said that I saw the ksiva, and one person who said I saw the chasima, so then that would be possible. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. And what do we know about this case? Afilu get yotze mitachas get yedei shneim pasle rabbanon. What did we just say? According to version 2 of Rav Yochanan, we're talking about a case where there were two shlichim, and they didn't say the right formula. They didn't say b'fanenu nechtav b'fanenu nechtam. What they had said is that two people saw the ksiva, and one person saw the chasima. So says the Gemara, if it's true that get yotze mitachas yideshnem paste rabbanan and amar le'in, that would in fact be their shita. So says the Gemara, then I don't understand. B'mai kamiflige, they're breaking all the rules. How could anyone be matir such a case? So to this, the Gemara answers as follows. We're halfway down at Mar Savar.
Amen.
So the Gemara says, how do we understand this machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda? Says the Gemara, back to an old machlokas from, well, let's call it 12 blot ago. Mar Savar lefi she'en beki'en lishma. Remember this one? That according to some, maybe the reason why we would say you're puzzle in this case, according to the Chachamim, is because people are not beki'en lishma. Umar savar lefi she'en edim mitzuyin l'kaimo. And according to some, maybe their concern is about edim mitzuyin l'kaimo. So the Gemara asks an obvious question. This is a question that we asked many blot ago. It seems from here that if the way you're interpreting the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is based on lishma versus edim mitzuyin l'kaimo, then what appears from the Gemara is lema. Perhaps we should say de Rabba v'Rava tanoihi, that maybe the shitas that we saw much earlier in this Masechta, in the first parak, that Rabba says the whole reason why we say befanai nechtam befanai nechtam is because of our concerns of lishma, and Rava says the reason why we say befanai nechtam befanai nechtam is because of the complexities of verifying signatures. Now it seems like each of them have their root in the Tanoim. So says the Gemara, lo, that is in fact not correct. This is not a source that proves that Rabba and Rava are rooted in the Tanaim. Why not? Because the Gemara says Rava mitaretz kilish nakama. Rava will get out of this issue by saying that version 2 is wrong and version 1 is correct. That's easy enough. The Rabba Omar, the Kule Alma, but lishma, everyone agrees that we need lishma. And in fact, everybody knows about lishma. And what is the case that we're dealing with in this machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda? Says the Gemara, we're talking about a case of la'achar shalamdu. In Chutz La'aretz, the Pashkevilin went up, and everybody knows that a get has to be written lishma. Even the biggest Am Ha'aretz knows that a get has to be written lishma. Today, we don't have that, right? Our Amaratzim don't know that a get has to be written lishma. Wow. I meant the Orthodox Amaratzim. I was talking about our community. No, for Pasha, outside, they don't know anything about a get at all. The Chasab LaSefer Krisus. This is a great, I use this all the time in secular circles in speaking about marriage and divorce, is that it's rare that you find that that divorce is a commandment. It's an oddity. It's really rare. So Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that there are unfortunate circumstances, a small percentage of which are just reality, where divorce is required, and then it's a mitzvah. It's actually buried in that sadness is a beautiful nakuda. But nevertheless, so it says the Gemara, we're talking about a case where everybody knows about lishma. Uvigzera, we're talking about a different concern. What's the machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda? Says the Gemara, the question is whether or not we're concerned that in Chutz La'aretz they're going to forget. We have this concern about Eruv. Our children, by and large, don't know that there's a thing called Eruv. So the Gemara says maybe there's going to be a day when they forget about Lishma. Maybe there's going to be a day. Demar Sover Gazrina, according to the Tanna Kama, who says that it's puzzle. So he says we are concerned. Umar Savar Lo Gazrinan. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, who's Machshir, he says, I'm not concerned about that. Word's out. The cat's out of the bag and it's not going to go back. Says the Gemara, if Rabbi Yehuda really holds this way, then V'liflog Nami Rabbi Yehuda Beresha. Then in the Resha, we should see that Rabbi Yehuda is going to be machshir in a case where, as of right now, we don't see that that's the case. Where is this going to be true? This is where the Mishnah says that one person says befanai nechtav and the other person says befanai nechtam. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that case should be machshir. And the Gemara says, don't worry, it is. 2/3 of the way down. Itmar Allah Amar Ula Chalukai Rabbi Yehuda af berishona, that even though our Mishnah doesn't record Rabbi Yehuda as a dissenting opinion against the Tana Kama, but really berishona in the early part of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is a dissenting opinion, and he holds he's machshir in a case where one person says befanai nechtav and the other one says befanai nechtav. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Masi Rav Oshia leula, that's not necessarily true. Rabbi Yehuda machshir bezu v'lo be'acheres. Rabbi Yehuda is only machshir bezu in the seifa of our Mishnah. In the case that we've been discussing of shnaim omrim b'fanenu nechta ve'echad omrim b'fanei nechta, there he's machshir, but v'lo be'acheres. But there isn't another place where Rabbi Yehuda holds that there's a hechsher. If that's true, then how did we just give our interpretation that af barishona, that even in the Reisha, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that he's machshir? So the Gemara says, my lav lemeute, doesn't this come to exclude the Reisha of our Mishnah, the case of echad omer b'fanai nechtav, echad omer b'fanai nechtam, and perhaps Ula is wrong, and really Rabbi Yehuda is not machshir barishona in the Reisha of our Mishnah, in the case of one shliach saying, I saw the ksiva, and one person saying, I saw the chasima. Says Gemara, no, that's not what he's excluding. Lo, what the Brisa means when it says that Rabbi Yehuda machshir v'zu b'lo b'acheres, lo, that's the meute b'fanai nechtam, aval lo b'fanai nechtav. That's where he said, I saw the chasima, but not the ksiva. Why did that case have to be excluded? Why did it have to be articulated that he doesn't hold that way? Because Amina, I might have thought that the shita of Rabbi Yehuda was as follows: that hol v'lo gazer Rabbi Yehuda gzeira shemayachzer davar lo kilkulo, because Rabbi Yehuda was not concerned about people in chutz la'aretz forgetting about the halachos of lishma and being chozer lekilkulo. So Dilma, I might have also thought that Rabbi Yehuda was asi leichlufe b'kiyum shtaros ta'alma be'ed echad nami lo gazar, that he even wouldn't have been concerned about the simple confusion between a get and a regular kiyum shtaros. Kamash malan, that's not true. That in a case where we have a reason to be concerned about a confusion between the verification of a get and shtaros ba'alma, Rabbi Yehuda is machmir. So about Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that he's not concerned about lishma, going back, that people aren't going to forget, but he is concerned about confusion between a regular get and kiyum shtaros ba'alma. Itmar nami, we have a statement from the Amoraim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, shnaim sheheviu get mi medina sayam. If you have two people who brought a get from France, then banu lemachlokes Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. And in fact, this line right here is a raya that the second approach that we've taken, version number 2, is in fact accurate. And version number 2 says that even if two people were appointed as shlichim, they need to say befanenu nechta befanenu nechta. The Gemara now tells the story. The first part of the story is relevant to us. The rest moves into some Jewish history that's interesting to know about. We're 6-7 lines from the bottom of Tez Zayin Amud Beis. We'll be going to the Mishnah toward the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Rabbi Bar Chana Chalash. Rabbi Bar Chana was ill. All legabe Rabbi Yehuda veRabba l'shiyu lebe. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabba, they went to go. How can it be Rabba? Rabbi Yehuda did not live at the same time as Rabba.
I don't know it's far okay, the Rabban.
Who?
The Rabban.
Oh,
Other students.
yeah, that makes more
I didn't
sense.
see your question.
What?
I didn't see your question.
Yeah, that because it doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yehuda was a Talmud of Rab and Shmuel, and Rabba, I guess they did live. Rabba was the next generation. Rabba was much younger than Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, nevertheless, that's a good correction. So it says the Gemara that they went to go visit Rabbi Bar Chana, and while they were there, they were talking and learning. Ba'omine, they asked of him, Shnaim sheheviu get mi medinas hayam. When two people are selected as shlichim to bring a get from France to Yerushalayim, tzrichen sheyomru befanenu nechtav befanenu nechtam. Oh, ain't tzrichen. To these two shlichim who've been handpicked by the husband to deliver a get to his wife, do they have to say the formal formula together, befanenu nechtav befanenu nechtam? And the Gemara says that Rabbi Bar Chana responded, Amar lehem ain't tzrichen. No, you don't need to do that. After all, what was the logic? Why is it that Rabbi Bar Chana held that you don't need to say befanenu nechtam when there's two shlichim? Says the Gemara, because ma'ilu yomru befanenu girsha. What if these two guys showed up in Bezdin and said she's divorced? They're two edim. That would have been fully trustworthy. So you're going to put them through the whole rigmarole that they have to start saying befanenu nechtam. Leave it be. They're trustworthy. Just done. The whole thing is done. After all, Milo Mehemne, of course, they're going to be believed. Adahachi, while they were in the hospital visiting him, Asa Hahu Chibra. Chibra, Rashi, Parsa'e, a Persian. So someone from the Persian dynasty walked in the room, Shakla l'shraga mikamayu, and he took the candle out of their room. Take a look at Rashi. Top line, second, Rashi libra maskal Shakla l'shraga. Sheyesh the Parsim Yom Eid. The Persians had a day of holiday. An Eid is a holiday. And on those days, she'ein madlikin or be'osa yom el beveis avodah zara shelahem. And the policy was on that day that the only candles that could be lit in the empire were those that were lit in the Beis Avodah Zarah. Everyone else was in the dark. So Rabbi Bar Bar Chana was upset. Omar, he calls up to the heavens and says, Rachmana Kadosh Baruch Hu, O Betulach, either put us Betulach in your shade, in your please protect us, basically. O Betula de Bar Esav, or at least put us back with the Romans. But these Persians are horrible. This is terrible. This is not a way to live. This is not normal. So says the Gemara, that's so odd. L'memra de Romae ma'alu miparsai. Is that to say that the Romans Empire was less bad than the Persians? That's not what's implied. Yud Zayin Amar Aleph 3 lines down. V'atani Reb Chia taught a brisa. My dichsiv. What does the pasuk mean when it says Elokim hevin darka abu yadas mekoma? So the pasuk itself is vague. The drush on the pasuk is Yodea Kadosh Baruch Hu sheYisrael she'ein yocholim lekabel gzeiras Romiyim. Kadosh Baruch Hu knew that the Jewish people could not handle the empire of the Romans. So Amad v'higlo samit lebavel. So what do we see? We see that the Romans were worse. Yet Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, in his complaint to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said, put me back with the Romans, the Persians are worse. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, Lo kasha. Ha mekame denesu chabre lebavel. Ha lebasar de'asu chabre lebavel. So we're talking here about Persians, chabre or chivre. I wonder what the punctuation is. Text, what is that? The punctuation on chibre? Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, 7 lines down.
It's Chabre, it says a Persian.
That's on the top line. Look 7 lines down, chavre. It says Lo kasha, ha mekame denisu chabre lebavel. Yeah. So he says that depends on when the Persians showed up. The Persians were the ones who made things really bad, and that's the difference between the two approaches.
So the question that comes out of that is, how do you deal with the Romans then? Because it just said a line before that the decree is going to be too hard for us to handle, and then it just.
No, but the answer of the Gemara is that when the Persians were in Bavel, it was worse than Rome.
Right, but what it says here, she'ein yocholim lekabel gzeiras haRomim. Right, so.
These are levels of evil. So the Gemara seems to imply that yes, in its baseline, Rome was worse than Rome. That in its baseline, it should have been that way, that Rome was worse than Persia, but Persia plus Bavel was worse than Rome. That's what it seems to be.
Even still, I get that, but if the decrees were so bad that we couldn't handle Rome, even if Persia was better, it doesn't mean that Rome we were able to deal with.
It's not a cakewalk. I agree. We've lived under different kinds of oppression. We're not familiar with this kind of stuff. Last night I ran a mental health program in New York. That's what I went for. We run a mental health initiative. Dr. Norman Blumenthal and Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg were the panelists. And we pre-scripted all the questions to make sure that we covered all of our topics. And Dr. Blumenthal said, the school of hard knocks is closed for our children. A great line. Such a great line. He said it numerous times. And the first time he said it, the room was like, oh, it's true. Our kids are bubble wrap. These were parents of
school age children.
Yeah, parents of school age children. About 150 people from across the 5 towns. And we have no idea what this stuff means. We don't live an oppressed life. We live a bubble wrapped life. And one of the greatest studies, he didn't quote this last night, but I heard Dr. Blumenthal quote it in another time, that the playgrounds that have the rubberized flooring have more broken bones than the ones with cement.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Because our brains change. We're so bubble wrapped. We're like, it's fascinating. So like when you're asking your question, Tex, Rome, Persia, our brains can't even fathom the levels of oppression. And I don't even know how to, we just don't know what we're talking about.
No, I get that. It's just saying that if Rome was so bad that we couldn't deal with it.
I hear your question and I don't know how to answer it because I don't know what either form of oppression was. They're both bad. And what was the trigger of all of this? He took my candle away, right? So it was a low level. I don't know.
Pretty buff.
Yeah.
Sitting in the dark.
Yeah, 100%. And you can't light one, they'll kill you.
Take out your cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. None of that.
Like for our kids, the hard thing is, going an hour without their phone. I mean, they're jonesing by the.
He said last night that there are kids who are choosing to stay home from their $10,000 summer camps because they cannot part with their phones. Amen. And what does that say about the next generation? Okay, let's continue. We can talk about this another time. Take very well done, Michael. Teku. I mean, I hope we have some answers to this problem. I can share some of their approaches later. Let's continue. The Gemara says a quarter of the way down at the two dots, we had spoken about a case in our Mishnah at the open of the Parakon test Vav Amud Aleph that Echad Omer B'fanai Nechtav, the Shnayim Omrim B'fanenu Nechtam. If the Chasima was witnessed by two, then we say kosher. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ami, Amar Rav Yochanan, Lo Shanu. When do we say that this is true? Ela she'aget yotze mitachas yad eid ksiva. What's an eid ksiva? So take a look at Rashi. Oh, I didn't mark it off, but it's somewhere here. I know it is. What's in the new Mishnah? No. Could have sworn. Oh, there it is. Mitachas yadei eid ksiva, 12 lines down or so. Te'ashliach ne'eman kishnayim. The person who witnesses the ksiva is actually treated as the primary shliach. So says the Gemara, when do we say this din of echad omer b'fanai nechtav and shnayim omer b'fanenu nechtam? That's when the primary shliach is an eid ksiva, the one who witnessed the writing, because the nasu kishnayim alzeh uchishnayim alzeh. Because since he saw the ksiva, it's as if he's two, because echad is kitrei, and the signatures was seen by two. Aval mitachas yedei eidei chasima pasal. But if the primary witness, the primary shliach, I should say, was the person who didn't witness the writing, but only witnessed the chasima, so then we would not allow for the two people to say that I saw the chasimas and let it be kosher, would be pasal. Alma, what's inferred from this line of Rav Yochanan? Kasavar, it must be that he holds that shnaim shehiviu get mi medinas hayam, that if you have two people who are appointed as shlichim to bring a get from France to Yerushalayim, we will only accept their double edus if they follow all the regular rules. Not this guy saw half and that guy saw half. None of that. They have to see everything. Amarle Ravasi says, Elameata, if what you're saying is true, that two shlichim, they have to say b'fanenu nechtam b'fanenu nechtam, then Reisha, Dikotani, in the Reisha, we say something that's very difficult for this Shita. We had said, Shnaim Omrim b'fanenu nechta ve'echad Omer b'fanei nechtam pasal, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. What do you mean, Rabbi Yehuda machshir? You just said that the rule is b'fanei nechta b'fanenu nechta b'fanenu nechtam. And ve'afilu get yotzim mitachas yidei shneim pasei rabbanon. It should be pasal just like the rabbanon. So Amar le'in, you're 100% right. That's what the Gemara says. That's a big kasha on the approach of Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says, Zimnin Ashkeche, the Yossi v'Ka'amar. Sometimes we actually saw this previous Shita that we saw just now, right here on this page in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. We actually saw it in the other way. The Yossi v'Ka'amar, Dafilu get Yotze mitachas yidei edi chasima kasher. Even if the primary witness was the one who saw the chasima and not the one who saw the ksiva, that's a different approach. So says the Gemara, we said it's kosher. Alma, that gives us an opposite implication than what we saw earlier. It seems to therefore be that kasavar shnaim shehiviu get Medina Sayam, that if two people were to have brought a get from Medina Sayam, ein tzrichin shem b'fanei nechta b'fanenu nechta. Oh, so that's a problem because the same exact line has now the same person has two shitas, and we have to figure out which one is correct. And on this new version, Amar le Ravasi elamayata, if that's true, what about the Reisha, the Katani, where we learned in the Reisha, Shnaim she'omer b'fanenu nechta ve'echad omer b'fanei nechtam pasal Rabbi Yehuda machshir? Why is it that the Tanakama said in that case that it's going to be pasal? Taima, we're 4 lines before the wide lines on Yud Zayin and Aleph. Taima, the reason why is the ein haget yotze mitachas yidei shneim, because the two Eidim the two Shlichim were not really appointed as Shlichim. Reuven just went for a walk with Shimon, but only Reuven was considered to be the Shliach. What's implied from here is haget yotze mitachas yidei shneim. But had it been that both of them were appointed, machshirei rabbanan, and if that's true, amar le'in, then we have opposite implications. According to one, it seems to be that we trust two Eidim even without b'fanenu nechtam. And according to one, no, they do have to say b'fanenu nechtam. So we don't know which one is right. So it says the Gemara, 5 lines ago, you said something different. So which one is it? So it says the Gemara, a line, I feel like we've had this before, but I don't see a mark here. Amar le Yased hu shelo tamut. This is a pillar that will not slip. So Rashi here explains Yased hu shelo tamus. Rashi says this is a Rashi that's a third of the way down of Yased hu lashon achron ze emes. Does anyone have a recollection of this line? I thought I have a terrible memory for these things, but I had a vague rap, but it wasn't marked off here by the Masoras Hashas. Either way, we're going to stop right here on Shabbos. We'll pick up at the Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.